happy to have you. That door too. Great, thanks. So, 20 years of having the Newburyport Literary Festival. We're so excited you're here. And I wanted to also note that the theme this year is the importance of being a reader. And I know everyone in the audience and on our panel today is a reader, and that's really why we're here. It's so exciting. Let me start by introducing our panel. So, our moderator today is Connie Johnson Hambley. Her short stories appear in the Anthony Award-winning Mystery Writers of America's anthology, Crime Hits Home, as well as Mystery Magazine and several Best New England Crime Stories. Her writing also appears in Bloomberg Businessweek, Financial Advisor, and Nature. Quite the spread. Connie is an active and supportive member of the crime writing community in New England, as well as being a passionate fan of crime and tries to keep it in the fictional realm. Learn more about Connie's award-winning novels, where family secrets link a world-class equestrian to a Boston-based terrorist cell, at ConnieJohnsonHambley.com, and follow her on Facebook. Next to Connie is Tracy. Tracy Sierra was born and raised in the Colorado Mountains. She is an attorney who currently lives in New England in an antique colonial era home, complete with its own secret room. When not writing, she spends time with her husband and 2 children. Night Watching is her debut novel and was selected as a Fallon Book Club pick. She has her book with her. Next to Tracy is Edith, aka Maddie Maxwell. Amesbury author Edith Maxwell writes the Agatha Award-winning historical Quaker Midwife mysteries set in Amesbury. Her Agatha Award-nominated short crime fiction has been published in 30 juried anthologies and magazines. That means that they're very, yes, you can't just get in it. It's not like free publishing. Including Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine and Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine. As Maddie Day, she writes the long-running Country Store Mysteries, the Cozy Capers Book Club Mysteries set on Cape Cod, the Wine Country C.C. Barton Mysteries, and the historical Dot and Amelia Mysteries. She is a member of Mystery Writers of America and a proud lifetime member of Sisters in Crime. She lives with her beau and their cat Martin, where she writes, cooks, gardens, and wastes time on Facebook. Don't we all? Find her at her website, on social media at wickedauthors.com and at Mystery Lovers Kitchen. And rounding out our panel today is Kate Niles. Kate is an award-winning author of 3 novels, and she holds an MFA from Vermont College. Currently lives in Providence, Rhode Island, after a lifetime in the American Southwest. Now I get it, Kate. Kate has been published widely in a number of genres, but considers novel my most beloved form. Her latest book, I can't even read my handwriting. Hold it up. The Last Hanging of Angel Martinez is a Zia Award winner in New Mexico. Angel is, you might say angel if you look at it, but it's Angel. And Kate's going to correct us when we're wrong. She's got it. All right? I'm going to turn it over to Connie.
Being here today is absolutely one of my joys because I'm connecting with crime writers and crime readers. And that means we share something, but that does not mean that we're all uniform and we share, only one viewpoint. And what's wonderful about our panel today is we are going to be talking about crime and mystery and how do we create and concoct the stories that we do. But we're going to talk about what the difference, the voice, the gravitas that each of these writers brings to their own writing in very, very different genres. We have Kate, who's traditional and literary. We have Edith Maddie Day as cozy, and we have Tracy as definitely suspense. I've spoken with readers who say, I picked up the first paragraph of your book and I couldn't read anymore. You know, but then you have other people who just are like, yeah, we are getting into it. So we all have to start somewhere. But with this, you know, we're all New England based. And I want you to take in our setting for just a minute. Behind me is a banner of 300 years that this church has existed. And on the panels that you see beside, you see who the reverends were. And you'll notice all of those reverends were men up until the most recent. And what is important about today's panel is that in our genre, we're well aware that it is, you know, most of the big crime writers, when you think crime writing, they immediately will think of, you know, Grisham or Patterson or, you know, a man. But here we are, you know, 4 women writers writing crime, great crime mysteries. So I have it on good faith, yes? So I have it on good faith that these walls will not crumble today under the weight of these women being here. But we all have to start somewhere. And what I want each of these ladies to do is just read just the opening salvos of their books. And as you're listening to them, just note the differences. So Tracy, you want to start?
Sure, I will get you through my first paragraph so that you will absolutely read more by the book. All right, I have a very general acquaintance here in New England, the man, young Goodman Brown, Nathaniel Hawthorne. There was someone in the house. She stood in her son's dark bedroom. Through its open door and down the long hallway, the landing at the top of the steep kitchen stairs was lit by the dim glow of a plug-in nightlight. The light was there so the children would be able to see the stairs in their nighttime wanderings, to prevent them silently, helplessly falling as they padded from their rooms to their parents' bedroom overnight, seeking water or comfort or after a wet bed. The old house let the wind hiss through and crack its ribs. The sounds of it bracing against the storm, its staggered breathing, were familiar, but through it all came noises that rooted her to the spot. Also familiar, but not at this time of night. Not when she had been sure she was the only one awake. In the brief hush between the frozen gusts came the wheeze of weight on the stairs.
I read the first chapter of this book, and I just was so scared. We're going to change some tone here. This book opens the day after my protagonist's first baby shower, and she's like 3 weeks away from giving birth to her first child. I had nothing to do before the due date except to stay calm and healthy. I also wanted to make sure my country store restaurant kept running smoothly, and hopefully I wouldn't get dragged into solving any more murders. I'd somehow become something of an amateur sleuth in the last few years, but South Lick and surrounds hadn't had a homicide on the books since May. I crossed my fingers that it stayed that way. This is in November. After I deposited the considerable till from the weekend and yesterday, I headed for the exit. My trajectory took me past the bank manager's office. In the open doorway, a man with short cropped hair stood speaking with manager Carter Kingsley. The short-haired man looked near Kingsley's age, maybe in his early 60s, with plenty of gray in his hair, and the back of his neck was tattooed. He certainly wasn't a regular in Pans and Pancakes, the popular country store breakfast and lunch restaurant I own and run. Being a curious person, I slowed to watch their interaction. Kingsley knit his brow and pressed his lips into a flat line. He shook his mostly bald head. The visitor opened his hands to the side. "I think it's something you should do." His voice was low and gentle. "Not gonna happen, Shellock." The man shrugged and turned. I whipped my face forward and resumed my waddle, pretending I hadn't stopped to take in their interaction. From the glare Kingsley shot me, I doubted I fooled either of them. I'll stop there.
Okay. Okay, so this is about a page and a half, and this is the prologue, the opening thing, and this is Taos in 2014. This is from a perspective of Carmelina. She wakes from a bad dream. The dog is dead again. Every night, the dog dies. It's getting to the point where she doesn't like to go to sleep. Mama, Mama, and Mama comes, as Mama always does. She sits with her and rocks her, smooths her hair. Is it the same dream? Her mama with the long brown blonde hair asks her. Carmelina sniffs away tears. Yes, where did you go? One day she had a dog, a little Jack Russell Terrier she named Barney after her favorite show. Then the next day there was no Barney. Mama said Barney must have run away. They put signs up all over the place. Mama said she called the animal shelter, the place she said where sometimes stray pets end up. But no Barney, and Mama almost looked weird when she talked about Barney missing. A weekend and she said maybe they had to think about Barney being gone. Now though, it has been a month. Now, Mama wants some juice. Juice isn't good for you after you brushed your teeth. She pouts, her black-brown auburn hair a mess from attempted sleep. She crosses her arm with resoluteness. Juice, Mama. Her mother sighs, smiles at her. Okay, little one, just once. Carmelina smiles and moves a bag down under the covers. Just the thought of getting some juice makes her happy, relaxes her. She begins to drift off. Somewhere in there, in the back of her head, where dreams reside, where what is real and what is not collide. It's as if a strong wind shakes the house, a kind of urgent shuffling, like when branches slap a window. A squawking noise, like a chicken. Her eyes fly open, low noises, a thud. Silence. Mama, she murmurs, burrowing further under the covers. Nothing. Her body is a coil. Mama? She does the opposite now, springing open from the coil, the covers flailing off. Mama? In the kitchen, her mother is face down on the floor. Something dark pulls under her neck. Mama, 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 she shakes her. A kind of low moan escapes, then a gurgle that makes the girl want to throw up, though she could not tell you why. Then nothing, a deep nothing, nothing. A cold silence even the newborn understand. Now the child is sobbing. Not Barney, now Mama. She's 4. She knows. She lies down on the body, on Mama's back, where the last of her warmth keeps Carmelina warm. That's how they'll find her when they come, asleep on her mother's dead back.
So you have a flavor that each of these women brings a certain sensibility to that. But we also learned something about these books, that each one has a woman protagonist, that each one is in a very specific place and time in her life. And so we're going to talk about the decisions that these authors have made in order to bring us that point, because we are here for how do we make a mystery and how do we do that. So I'm going to start with Kate, and I'm going to ask one question first, which is what drew you to crime fiction? And how does your chosen subgenre, which you say is literary and traditional, reflect in your storytelling style?
So, I've always read murder mystery. I think, I read obviously a lot of literary stuff, but I read a lot of murder mystery. And I also grew up Western, and I really lead from place as character. That place is extremely important to me and is more than just setting. And really good crime fiction, I think, always has a sense of place that is really profound. So I won't pick up a murder mystery series if I'm not into the place. And it could be like New Orleans, or it could be LA, or it could be whatever, but it's something that is very evocative. So there's those two things. And I think also I've had a lifelong exploration of human character and what actually makes human evil, which is, I guess Edgar Allan Poe is the father of the murder mystery, theoretically. And of course he said that that's really what this was all about. So I think all those things kind of come together.
Edith, sure.
What brought me to crime fiction?
Yeah.
Yeah. My mother had a living room full of crime fiction. I mean, floor to ceiling bookshelves, almost exclusively filled with mysteries. And so it was just always, and I was an avid reader. My whole family were big readers, and I'm very, as a child, I was prone to nightmares because I have this, and I still have, a hyperactive imagination. And I wasn't allowed to watch scary Twilight Zone or scary movies, but any of those books on the shelves was fair game because we were a family of readers. So I was reading Poe and Sherlock Holmes at like 8, having nightmares later that night. Nancy Drew, of course, Nancy Drew. And I went through some other I read some science fiction and some different things over the course of my life, but in about 30, 40 years ago, I was starting to read more. I was getting back into reading mystery. And, you know, I was reading Robert Parker and some of the men, and, you know, you've got to read about women's legs and boobs a lot when you read that kind of fiction. And that was when Sarah Paretsky and Sue Grafton and Catherine Hall Page were writing their books, some women PIs and some cozy. And I went, oh, I don't have to read about women's boobs and legs when I read a book written by a woman with a female protagonist. And so when I started writing fiction again, when I started writing murder mysteries in the mid-90s, I thought, okay, well, that's what I'm going to write, because that's what I love reading. And you know, you spend a lot of time with your book and your characters and your story, and I don't want to spend all that time if I don't enjoy reading that kind of book.
And Teresa, you and I share a background being an attorney by training and whatnot, so that's also kind of a male-dominated field. But did that help draw you to crime fiction?
Yes and no. I think, like probably everyone in this room, I enjoy and have always enjoyed reading kind of scary stories and whodunits. I also am just really fascinated with the question of evil, period. I think, yeah, that it just, even in real life, you know, evil, people talk about it as sort of animalistic or whatever, but evil is all too human, right? An animal can't really be evil. Only human beings can, and I find that question really interesting. And initially when I went to law school, I was, you know, very sure I wanted to be a prosecutor, probably. I mean, I was deep into the law and order sort of idea. And I worked for the U.S. Attorney's Office and worked on a couple prosecutions. And I definitely drew from that in this book, because you do come face to face with evil in that job, but decided that I couldn't kind of do that on a day-to-day basis, and especially because, you know, the dangers in that job. Side story, but one of my bosses, the guy they were prosecuting, hired someone to kill him during the prosecution. And I thought, you know, this is a little too close to home for me. I don't love this idea. I think that as someone who is very anxious, generally speaking, which I think is extremely helpful in storytelling, less helpful as a prosecutor. So I decided not to go that route, but certainly the work I did there helps inform the book, and I think probably will help inform everything I write, just because, you know, you do get a glimpse behind the curtain.
Well, I noticed with each of our backgrounds that with Kate, psychology probation officer, social work background, Edith, copious amount, 36 novels. Can we give it up for 36 novels out there? And then with the law background too, because I found with my own training and my own sensibilities, it bleeds through. You know, who you are as a person, even though you're writing a fictional character, it definitely bleeds through. It bleeds through in their sensibilities, it bleeds through in their worldview. But also for me, it came through in actual, the structure of the book. How did I want the world that's in my head to make sure it got into the world in my reader's head the way I wanted it to. So with Tracy, talk to me about, you talked about the evil piece. What parts of you, and I'll just preface this one second. One thing about fiction and crime fiction is that it allows us kind of a safe place to explore things we wouldn't necessarily explore in real life. So you talk about evil and you explore it in a really different way. So talk to me about some of those decisions you made and the decision you made in making your main character as you did.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't do much outlining, let's say, as to plot. I sort of end up doing a one-page outline. I like to know I have a beginning, a middle, and end. I tend to think Night Watching leans a little more thriller than anything else, so I did want, those moments of kind of reckoning that are hopefully satisfying as a reader, and that I so love when reading thrillers. But the outline is character. And so I will have just pages of sort of almost backstory and ideas of who this person is. The vast majority of the research I do is psychology and reading books about human psychology and this kind of thing. And I also, even though the main character of my book is a mother of two, like I am, who lives in an old house like I do, she is far more capable a human being than I am, I would say. I think that I think it's really fun to explore people who are different than you, and for me, I would get very bored reading about myself. I don't mean to insult myself, basically. And so I very early on decided I wanted someone who was definitely someone who had always played by the rules, but was very mathematical, very intelligent, a sort of three-dimensional thinker, which I am not, and for her to be able to draw on these strengths. And I really like that because I know so many of those women in real life who are, engineers or, data scientists, etc., and you never really see someone like that reflected in kind of thriller fiction. And so I really wanted someone who's, very logical, right? And even though she's in the most terrifying situation I could possibly put her in, I wanted her to be ultimately kind of the strong, silent, logical type that we're a little more used to seeing reflected in sort of male heroes, but that frankly I see a lot throughout my own life and women I admire.
Right, but there's also something about your main character that is very different from any others. I mean, yes, she is very logical. She does have this kind of intellectual superpower, but you painted her as incredibly petite. You painted her as, being someone very different than what you might find, in the Unitarian Universalist Church on a Saturday afternoon. So you bred something into your character that was also had an innate conflict, and that helped drive your story as well.
Yeah, I mean, she has, like I think a lot of us, a lot of self-doubt, and especially because she's home with her children when this home invasion happens, this immense sense of responsibility that any person would have, and I think it drives a lot of her trying to figure out what to do. But you never know how you'll react in an emergency situation. Sometimes something happens and you think, wow, I handled that great, I'm amazing, and then the next time you completely freeze, you have no idea what you're doing. It's very upsetting, and it makes you kind of question your idea of yourself and who you really are. And she goes through all of that range of emotions, and I didn't want kind of the action hero, she's no Jack Reacher, very large and decisive. But she goes through that entire range of emotions during any emergency that I think probably, hopefully, realistically, anyone would.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then with Edith, when we're introduced to Robbie, we're being introduced to a character that has a rich backstory, has a rich history already with your readers. But yet you've made decisions about this character all along the way. So what parts of you got into Robbie? And what did you want to keep? And what did you say, right?
So Stone Cold Dead is the 13th in this Country Store series. And that's a pretty long run. It opens...
Was that your longest series, by the way?
Yeah, so far is my longest running series. And it opens, and the first book came out in, I think, 2017, maybe, Flipped for Murder. And it opens on the first day when she opens her Country Store restaurant. And she's from Santa Barbara, but she's been living in Indiana for a few years, where her mother was from. And before the first book opens, her mother has died suddenly. Her mother was a cabinet maker and died, 9 months before, a year before. And Robbie is still grieving that, but she also learned carpentry from her mother. So she does a lot of the fixing up of this rundown store that she buys. And she doesn't know if it's going to fly. I mean, she's a cook, she's a chef, so she knows how to cook. But over the course of these books, which in book time is about 4 or 5 years, I think, she finds this core cast of core employees who are really her friends. She becomes good friends with the mayor, who's this bigger-than-life flamboyant woman, and with the police lieutenant, who's a quirky guy with all kinds of funny Southern expressions. Anyway, she changes quite a lot over the series of over the arc of the series. And in the first couple books, there was one guy who had emerged as her boyfriend, and then he didn't turn out to be a good guy. This other guy came on the scene, and that's who she ended up getting married to. And she has this knack. She's a puzzle master, so she'll design a crossword puzzle to help her think through a homicide, like who are the suspects, who are the people of interest. And so she's got this knack for doing that. But she's 8 months pregnant, and she's got to keep herself safe, even while trying to track down a killer. And that was an interesting challenge. Like, she's waddling around and she's got another person to think about, but she also has this really strong need to solve the crime. What did you ask?
You got it. And then with Kate, when we met Nina Mansfield, I can't help but thinking, after reading your background, I was meeting you as well. So I feel like there was a whole lot of you in Nina. So what made you decide to model someone so closely about yourself? And where did you build in that distance?
So it's funny because I didn't mean to have Nina be such an alter ego, but I think she is. I was I started writing, again, in midlife, and like everybody else here, interested in women's perspectives, and particularly women in maybe midlife. And I have been a writer, and I'm a trauma therapist, but the first job that I had when I was going back to get a social work degree I was a probation officer for 3 years. And I think that the combination of, and I didn't realize at the time when I was writing out what I was doing, it's very similar to your story of the whole evil thing, is metabolizing both my experience as a probation officer and early therapeutic experiences. And then also the tension between art. So Nina's an artist as well. She's a sculptor. She's a ceramic sculptor, which is very loosely based. I had a godmother named Nina Decreef Ward, who was a very famous sculptor, and she kind of provided a model of creativity in a household where creativity was very stifled. So I would escape to my room and read Nancy Drews on end and things like that. Jane Eyre, usual run. So I think I was actually metabolizing a lot of that section of my life without even really realizing it, and really discussing the tension between needing to do art as a release and as a part of creativity. But if I just did art, as Nina says, she would feel like a narcissistic, going down a rabbit hole. But if I just did the day job, I would not. That would drive me insane. So she's really interested in that tension. And the thing about Angel, who most of my characters are just out of complete whole cloth. I don't know where they came from. And Nina herself has her own quirks. I put some things in that are very much not me, but...
Well, I love the relationship with Luis, the flamenco dancer.
Oh, of course, everybody likes Luis.
Yeah, I love that.
I know. I had to put a flamenco dancer in there that picks up. She's a widow. I mean, her husband has died very early. And then Luis comes along, and Luis is a very sexy flamenco dancer. Because I saw a Luis on the stage in Santa Fe years ago, and I was like, who is that guy? So, these things get into your books. But I guess, I didn't intend for that, but a lot of people have said, oh yeah, I can hear you coming through on that.
That's interesting. Well,
I just realized I didn't actually answer the question that you asked. Like, what parts of me are in Robbie, sorry. I've never owned a diner. I don't enjoy riding my bicycle on hilly roads. I mean, but I think the part that comes through is a devotion to family and loyalty to friends. I think that's the part of me that comes through that particular
you're a
character.
doula too, right? Didn't you have
I was a doula and I did labor support and that kind of thing. I wasn't a midwife.
And so what else I loved about this panel and about exploring, women authors, et cetera, and women protagonists, is that we have women at different stages of their lives. We have one about ready to start a family. We have a mom of young children. And then we have a mom who has an older son, and she's trying very hard not to overparent him and not to smother him. So again, I really felt like, seeing those stages in your writing was so interesting. And then in Tracy, in your book, that drive came through of protecting those children at all costs. We have Robbie who's protecting her unborn. We have the mom who's trying to protect but find her place in life, navigating that. But in Night Watching, that mom, that protagonist, she is going to protect her kids. And that is in good thrillers, that's the driving force for your story. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think that at one point in the book, she is talking, she's well aware that she's this very slight person and, not very physically strong, right? Not an action hero. So she has these stereotypes of like the mom with a rush of adrenaline lifting the car off of the baby. And she's thinking and how ridiculous that is, she can't do that, that's impossible.
Because she's literally like 5 feet tall, right?
Yeah, she's tiny. Yeah. I wanted to really take a physical confrontation off the table. I think living life as a woman, most of the time, a physical fight, you're gonna lose. Like it or not. So I really wanted to very clearly take that off the table. Nevertheless, one of my most common questions is, why didn't she just hit him? Oh, well, I don't think I'd win in a fist fight against anyone either. She's thinking about that sort of stereotype of the mother lifting up the car, and then she's flashing back to, when she was having her kids and all that was demanded of her physically during a difficult childbirth, and just how impossible it truly is to protect your kids when it comes down to it, right? Like, we all have to let them go in some way, and it's an impossible ask, right? No matter what, even if you're not in a very difficult situation. And, so often what's asked of women is sacrifice. And often that sacrifice is very physical. You have to, you give birth, you nurse, it is this very physical thing that I frankly don't think I appreciated before I became a mother myself, and it's this certain amount of just sacrifice of self that's expected, and she is frustrated by that and by not living up to that, because it's an impossible thing to live up to. But nevertheless, no matter what, she's going to try and do whatever she can to protect her kids. Just, I think, frankly, like most people and almost anyone would.
Right.
And yeah, so that's definitely her driving motive.
Yeah, there's a mother's intuition that also comes through in each of the characters. And in Kate, I saw that intuition when she's a probation officer, one of her, what would you say, probatees, is being targeted as the main suspect for a particular crime. But there's that tuning fork in her head that's saying, I'm just not convinced. So do you say that that was a maternal urge that came out, or was that the professional underpinnings coming through?
I think a little of both. I would say, I guess, women's intuition in a way, and a way of looking at a crime scene and getting a different whiff of what might be going on than this is part of than the male cops do. So the male cops are like, oh, you know, she's a domestic violence victim, and oh God, same, you know, and they can't get past that. And so, yeah, and she's just like, I don't know, man. You know, I can't give it away. But absolutely, I think you can call it maternal, but I also think it's the experience of being a woman and the experience of having that intuition that this isn't fitting some way of viewing the world in her head, so.
Well, what's interesting, and it comes through in Edith's book as well, where, you know, we're women writers, we're writing about a woman protagonist, but we also are speaking to our whole community. And our community, obviously, you know, men, others, whatever, we're talking to larger truths about that. So with Edith's book, with Robbie, she is so community-oriented. She, you know, the Pans and Pancakes as the diner, that is the cross-section where everyone comes through, where she gets snippets of everyone's life. So there's this heart that comes through with Robbie. So, which you know, knowing you and the crime community that I do, somehow I think that that's a lot of Edith and Maddie Day as well. But talk to me about the decision of making her so inclusive in that regard.
Decision? You make it sound like I did it on purpose.
Then it just was organic.
I mean,
too.
I mean, it's part of the genre I write. These gentle, village-based, community-based mysteries. All of my series the protagonist has this core group around her, whether it's the book club or the family or, you know, the people who come into the wine bar in the C.C. Barton series.
So you're saying that that's, you know, specific to your cozy genre to make it that, you know, that core.
It's community-based. It's always community-based. And, I mean, there are various kind of guidelines for what makes it cozy and what kind of things you can address and can't address. There's no swearing, there's romance, but you close the bedroom door before it gets too exciting. You know, there's no swear words. But the most important thing is that justice is restored to the community, balance is restored at the end. And one thing I've said a lot at Author Toss, especially in the last 5 years, is that I don't want you to feel worse about the world when you're done reading my book. Because the world is messy and scary enough as it is, and it has been since 2020, and it's now for other reasons. And, you know, during the lockdown, writing was my respite. I had author friends who said, oh, I just couldn't, I was paralyzed. It was so horrible. And I said, oh my God, it's the only thing I can control. I can make things right. I can control what goes on in my characters' lives. I mean, till they take control and then, you know, go off on their own tangent as they do. But And then I can make things come out right at the end. And that's just really important for me in what I read and in what I write.
And I do want to talk about, community was so important to Cozy, and I do want to touch base on the art community as well in your book, Kate. But I really want to, what struck me in your book, Tracy, was when you're talking about community, and it's very New England. She lives in this, centuries-old house. That was the center farmhouse, and all of the land around it has been sold off and is now, McMansions in that. And she, the main character, she is of herself, kind of isolated in this old house. And I'm not giving too much away by saying she needs to make a decision to reach out to a community in the McMansions that she doesn't really know, she doesn't have comfort with, but also she's not like them. She doesn't know how she's going to be received. So I thought, as we talk about mystery, crime, and suspense, again, that was that conflict that propelled, this story. So can you talk to us about community?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what you said, because I feel the same way. Like I actually wrote this novel during COVID, and part of the reason she's so isolated is that it is during COVID, and she only recently moved to that house, so she's separate from her community. And I think it's so interesting because cozies are very much about the larger community and the colorful characters, and thrillers are very much about getting your characters as alone as humanly possible. And many take place in a remote island where suddenly there's a storm and the cell phone doesn't work. You really have to get them as isolated as possible. Cell phones are our greatest enemy. And so, but it's really interesting too, because I think thrillers also, hopefully, the ending is this satisfying restoration of some kind of balance. And I think, hopefully in a lot of fiction, it's that way. I mean, I've even felt that way at really sad stories sometimes, because it's so beautiful, or it gives you this sense of life. And I think it is really interesting though, because I think we get to the same place weirdly from opposite directions. And I think part of what draws so many people to crime as readers is that there is a sense of, justice and balance that you may not always get in real life, and you may not always get in, say, true crime, for example, or at least not initially, and it takes a very long time and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's just really interesting that I do think fiction is so restorative that way.
So with your community, you seem to observe those in the McMansions. And when we were slowly being introduced to them, we were, as a reader, when I say we as the reader, we didn't know how she was going to be received. We thought, oh my gosh, she could be going right to the center of it and not know. But again, it was the maternal urge that was driving her forward. And then, Kate, you made the art community, you talk about your genre being literary as well as traditional mystery. And it was the art community it was the artist's sensibility in Angel that made your protagonist question, if someone can create someone that beautiful, are they truly capable of that evil? And I think that's a really interesting exploration inside the books that you created with that. And so you did use the art community. So can you tell us a little bit about that and the decision that you made to make that so much of a fabric inside your book?
So in terms of Angel, who really you don't really want to like at all, but that's the place where she finds out he's an artist too, and so that's a place where there's this human touch that starts to come in, and it's a very tricky dance between the two of them. And I really wanted, much like Tracy's character, I wanted to complexify him, because most of us are really complex, and very few of us are Hannibal Lecter, or even people who do huge evil are not usually 100%, complete psychopaths. So I was really interested in that. And then Nina herself has a really rich community. It's set in Taos, New Mexico, and Santa Fe. And she has a really rich Taos community that is not just artists, although that's really important for her, but it's also cops and people who run stores downtown, and they have a kind of geezer soccer team that gets together, and it's just kind of a way of embodying the Taos ethic. Then they go pig out on New Mexican food afterwards. So one of the reasons I love murder mysteries is usually a good food component, so I make sure there's a lot of New Mexican food in here. I also I think that's a really interesting point about cozy mysteries, is that community is what heals. And I think that in a thriller, you're getting people back into some resolution. In my day job now, I'm a trauma therapist, and I think one of the things that's really, really satisfying about mystery and fiction, but maybe particularly mystery, is you do get resolution. You get to solve the puzzle. You get to put some sort of world back together. And I think that is really, we all need that in some regard. We need to believe in that.
Yeah, I don't want to ignore the fact that we also get to kill someone we really don't like.
Do. Oh, yes.
That's very important.
This is true. There's that. And there was one other thing I was going to say, but yeah, that's true. Oh, and that Angel, once we get into that whole story and the whole thing that sets up Carmelina's mom's death, is really also a question about how community and family blows apart, and where bad stuff happens when that happens. So I was exploring both of those.
Yeah, and again, each of these books is so different, but it does explore all of these different themes in different ways. And so we were able to step into Kate's character, Nina Mansfield. We were able to step into Edith Matty Day's character of Robbie Jordan. And it wasn't until I was putting these questions together and I was like, wait a second, what was the main character's name in Tracy's book? And then I realized you made the decision not to name her. And so when I was, crawling through your YouTube interviews, including Jimmy Fallon, which I want to get to, I heard you say that by not, she was so much of an other. She was so different from us. But by not naming the character, it allowed your reader to step into her shoes just that little more. And I also felt that you imbued your character with those universal truths of, protecting your kids, and so that decision was really interesting. Did you get pushback during the writing process, or was it like, no, she's not going to be named, leave me alone?
Yeah, no, the only pushback I got was from my editors saying, this isn't going to be your thing, is it? And everyone, no, it is not. But this is a very close set. It's a very small set of characters, and I had kind of chosen, I love names, ironically enough, and I'd kind of chosen a set of names, but then I'm a very linear drafter, so I was a few chapters into writing, and at that point, it was just the mother and her children. And so they're calling her mom, and she's using terms of endearment, and she's trying to keep them calm. And so it was a very natural way to write this particular story, and as I kind of proceeded, I really liked it because, you see a headline, and it says, woman 36 in car accident or whatever, think. It's very anonymous, right? And it's very not you, even if you happen at that point when you read it to be a woman who is 36 or whatever. And I get that same sense with true crime. It's always this little bit of a distance away, and I very much wanted to focus on the target of a crime rather than, the perpetrator. So I wanted to still create that distance, but it is told in close thirds, so you're right beside her. So I hope that it serves to allow people to step in, but still have this distance that lets them kind of coldly evaluate her the way that we do, in headlines and that sort of stuff. And kind of play a little bit with the unreliable narrator thing, because that's, pretty much I think.
And that was really masterfully done. That was really masterfully done in your book, where you're at this critical point and you realize that you all of a sudden do start to question her. and some of the decisions that she's made. And it was really interesting how you manipulated the reader into that.
Yeah, I think women, we question ourselves a lot, frankly. I think we do. We're our biggest critics. And so it was very kind of easy, but to create that kind of distance, you have to. I also really don't like, you know, in a book when it's like, there's some trick in the first person, like, haha, I was lying all along, or whatever, you know. I always feel like that's kind of whipping the rug from underneath you, so I didn't want to do that. So instead, I manipulate you emotionally instead of just lying.
And another thing with each of you had such distinct settings. You know, Kate, in your book, I was, you know, smelling the air with the, you know, spices, and I could, you know, taste the Mexican food, and just the community of who it was. And, you know, obviously that was so much a part of you to have that setting there. And then with Indiana, you have Indiana roots, right? And then you're in a house with its own secret rooms and whatnot. So can each of you, we're going to have a few more minutes, just each of you talk about the setting. Why did you want to put your books there? Okay?
Because, man, New Mexico rocks. I spent, yeah, although you were wearing the jewelry, it's great. And I actually talked about the jewelry on this, like, first page. My writing evolves very much out of place. I spent 12 years in New Mexico. My first adult career, I was actually an archaeologist, and I worked for the state of New Mexico. So you pick up all kinds of stories out of the dirt, literally. So I guess in some ways this book I actually dedicated to New Mexico. It was my homage to New Mexico because it's also where I found love again. It's where my husband and I married. It's just a very special place for me, and it just is so I guess I would argue it's one of my biggest muses. It just is so evocative for me. So I think that I'm just leave it there.
I love New Mexico too. I haven't lived there enough to write a book there, but I would like to.
The next series.
Maybe. I spent 5 very happy years getting a now long, dusty doctorate in southern Indiana. And I'm a native Californian, and now I live in Massachusetts, but I love the Midwest. I love it's just quieter, the pace of life is slower, people talk slower. I thought I would feel starved for the ocean, and I didn't. And Indiana University, where my great-great-great-grandfather actually founded it, there's a Maxwell Hall on campus, and it's in Monroe County, but the next county over, Brown County, is hilly. It looks like Vermont. They have maple trees and apple trees, and a lot of quirky artists living in the hollows. And that's where I decided to set my fictional town. I found on a map, and I was out there, South Lick Creek, but there's no town of South Lick. So I thought, that's what it is. And it's exactly where I wanted to place it. Outside the county seat a little bit. And it really, it's really resonated. I mean, Country Store Mysteries is my most popular series. I think people have maybe an idealized image of the Midwest and of the Southern Midwest that may or may not be true, but I did my best to bring it to life, including these quirky sayings that might be a little more Southern, but like Lieutenant Buck says, well, that went faster than green grass through a goose, and things like that. And I just really loved bringing that whole region to life. And I just had these very happy years as a graduate student in the next county over, so that's why I put it there.
So my book was written during COVID and is set in my house because that's where I was. And I was very much wandering the halls and thinking of things like, oh, how does this sound? How does that sound? It's set during a nor'easter. But on kind of a larger scale, not growing up in New England, and most people I meet in New England are from New England and may not realize that what you think is true is in fact true. New England looms enormously large in our cultural imagination. right? To the point that, like, growing up in Colorado, we don't have the same weather you do at the same months, but our little calendar, come fall, there are the leaves, and it's harvest time, and meanwhile, there's like 3 feet of snow on the ground, right? So, but everything is very New England-centric, all the stories, so much of the history, and especially the spooky season, really. It's hard to emphasize how much it kind of looms in our cultural imagination, to the point that you can say Old New England home, and anyone in this country just, they know. They're picturing Salem, they're picturing the Hocus Pocus house, they're picturing, this kind of, they immediately know. And so I really wanted to capitalize on that, and living in an old home myself, it is everything they said it would be, and it's really just a fun place to set a book that you want to be a little spooky.
As a native Southern Californian, we had orange trees and avocado trees. We did not have apple trees and sledding, but that's what we all drew pictures of, and we cut snowflakes out of paper.
Right? It's true.
So I'm going to open it up to questions. So get your questions ready. But I do have one last question for Tracy. What was it like being on the Jimmy Fallon show?
Oh yeah.
It was terrifying. It was very scary. It was backstage. I was very nervous. Everyone was very nice. I met the actual celebrities and forgot to take pictures with every single one of them. And except they had like a staff photographer, so I do have pictures of me with Fallon. And then I walked on the stage, and I thought, this is the last time I've walked. I think the last time I walked on a stage was middle school, and then I blacked out. And that was it. I have no memory. It's like watching it the first time.
And so, any questions, anyone? Okay. All right. Oh, come on, you're crime and mystery writers. You're not shy. Here we go.
Hi, I have a question about cozy writing. I was in a workshop with an agent who was saying that with the popularity of Thursday Murder Club and Finley Donovan, are you getting any push to move in that direction? Or is it just making cozy more popular in general and good for you?
I was talking with my agent about a new project. She said, well, publishers that are buying cozies, they want something big like Thursday Murder Club or The Maid, and I went, great. I'm really good at writing something small. So I'm trying to think of that big thing, but that's what they're looking for, yeah.
You can solve one real-world mystery. What would it be?
The question was if one of our panelists could solve one real-world mystery, what would it be?
Jeez. At a panel years ago, I had somebody ask me, well, do the police in your town ever come to you and ask for your help solving crimes? I went, are you kidding? No, they don't. One real-world mystery.
You have one? The Lindbergh baby, we can go back. No?
Where did Amelia drown? Amelia Earhart. That's what I know. Because I have this historical that features her as a sleuth in 1926 Boston.
I guess I would just say all the bodies of women who are found and what's happening. I guess I always go to that, so.
I have a friend who was murdered, and I would very much like to know who did it. And I think it's kind of funny, a lot of crime writers do, I think, have kind of a personal connection sometimes to crime, whether it be, something prominent happened in your town before you were born and colored the nature of where you were, and frankly, I think that's a human thing too, that these things have ripple effects.
Yeah, it does. And for me and my family, it was arson on a dairy farm. So yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I would agree. More questions?
To what extent has Edgar Buchanan been an inspiration to any of you?
Has what been?
Edgar Buchanan, the crime writer from the Miami Herald. No. I guess not.
We don't know who that is. Gotta look it up now.
Yeah, I know. Now
That's
now
my
we have
ideas.
to talk about a mystery we have to solve. We have to get into that.
Do you know Carl Hyacin of the Miami Herald, who's hilarious and also has murder mystery in it, but that's the only Miami connection I can think of.
Yeah. More questions?
I don't have a question. but
Okay.
I did want to remark on.
Okay, we have a microphone for you.
And it's for Kate. I noticed when you read your story that you used a lot of short sentences mixed with long sentences, which really gave more impact. And your voice matched. The way that you read it, everything about it, I'm very interested in reading it now. But I love minimalism. If you can write, I'm a short story editor and writer, but if you write something and you pick the exact right words, and that's what you do. So I was really impressed by that.
Well, thanks.
Any other comments?
Is it partly because it's in the little girl's voice?
Oh, no, I think I mix short and long quite a bit. I tend to actually have to break up my sentences in draft. I tend to write long sentences. I actually realize I always think I should be writing like 600-page novels, and they always end up being 300. And so I guess they seem to actually reduce. I do edit, and it does seem to get to that point. I'm going to be a raging feminist here for a minute. I don't want to be Ernest Hemingway. And I think, he walked into the bar. And Rebecca Solnit makes a really good point about allowing a sentence to go wherever it goes, and to write fully fleshed out, as she often does. But I also don't want to lose people. My tendency is I will realize that I've lost the original beginning of the sentence because I've wandered somewhere, and then I cut it. Then I get more minimal. And I must be good at that because it reduces down. But maybe it is like making a fine stock for soup. You have to reduce it down. So.
And it might depend on what kind of scene. Like, is it a really high suspense, high tension scene? You might want short sentences to, the person is breathless, they're terrified. You might want short sentences and save the longer ones for another.
Just real quick, I learned craft through poetry, not through journalism. And poetry teaches you where you break a line, where you don't break a line, alliteration, the last hanging of Angel Martinez. I mean, this just runs through everything I do. So I think that gets at that too. It's like, where do I want the emphasis? And poetry taught me craft.
I thought you created an eerie emotion
Yeah.
by doing that.
I think we have another question.
I'm just curious to all of you if there's ever any issue trying to figure out the age of your protagonist when you start. I write for the screen, and I'm always told my character has to be younger. And so if I write a character in her 50s, I better hope Nicole Kidman's available because it's not getting made. And I'm just curious, I guess it's a broader question for the literary world, writing my first novel now. Is that ever an issue with ageism or not? And how do you go about that?
Well, in my genre, when I started out, most of the protagonists were sort of in their 20s, late 20s, which gives your character a long time to age if you're going to write a long series, which can be good. There are now series being written with protagonists in their 60s. And my most recent one, Cece Barton, I started her off at 42, and she's a widow with a daughter in college. And I just really like that. And also in all of my series, there's a kick-ass older person, Aunt Adele, or some older person who's part of the main set of characters who keeps coming in. Not in her or his voice, but that's a really important part of my books.
I think it's really interesting because I think a lot of readership does skew a little bit older, and women read a lot of fiction, frankly, compared to men. So there's a lot more leeway than there is, I think, in the film world. But I think it's what's so brilliant about, like, with what someone like Reese Witherspoon has done, because she's essentially vertically integrated that book to screen pipeline by capitalizing on the fact that with novels there's a lot bigger age range possible, and I think everyone is well aware of that. It's not like when you were in your 20s, you only enjoyed books about people in their 20s. You know, you enjoy books about people from different ages because you're stepping into someone else's skin. You know, the internalized, like, voice is what's so unique about books compared to film. And she's been able to take that with her club, see what works, and then make it into film for her and her friends who maybe wouldn't have the sort of meaty roles otherwise, because it is sort of, you know, the phenomenon of, you know, younger. And I know a lot of writers who, when they're talking film deals, the film people will say, well, what's, you know, your deal breaker? And it's always, please do not make my character, you know, so much younger, look like she was a child bride, you know, and be like 25 with 3 kids or whatever. Like, no, please don't do this. Because it does, I think, in film skew so much younger. It's much more forgiving, I think, in books.
Yeah, I do think there's a lot more leeway in novel, and I have this complete resistance fighter in me that wants to flip the bird to all of that, and the whole reason I wrote a middle-aged character was F.U., because I'm so tired, and I do think murder mystery provides a place for women protagonists of many ages to come, and as has been mentioned, the readership is us. And I guess I feed on, I mean, I'm a therapist, and actually I love it that it's a profession I can have until I croak, if I manage to sound okay. Because people come to me all the time and say, thank God you're not 30. And I think that's true. I've had a lot of comments on this, but I would not have been able to write this book if I was not the age I am. Because there's a texture to it that if you're going to have a 25-year-old protagonist, you're just not going to get that texture. And I think that's really sad that we can't, I think it's getting better, but that film needs to evolve in that direction.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to say how honored and how lucky are we that we live here and got to listen to these 4 award-winning authors today. It's fabulous. Thank you so much.